Welcome to this free video lesson by totally.co.uk, in which we are going to have a look at how to write a great essay for paper 1 on your IB English A language and literature. You can download all of the resources that you'll need for today's video lesson on my website. The link is down below if you're joining us on YouTube, so you'll be able to get a copy of the past paper, you'll be able to get a copy of the grade 7 exemplar, and you can also take a review quiz to see how much you've remembered. Now this video lesson is a part 2. In part 1 we already analysed and annotated a print advert, this print advert, and we analysed it looking at Teep Kalim. So if you haven't already watched that video, I do really recommend that you watch that first and then come back to this because you'll get more out of it if you do. I will link that somewhere also. Now here is the print advert that we analysed and annotated in the last lesson. If you didn't watch that lesson and you haven't got time, you might want to pause the screen now just to read over it. So this is a print advert that appeared in an American comic book called Supercat in 1957. And the guiding question is, in what ways does the interplay between image, layout and language help the advert to achieve its purpose? Now in this video lesson, we've already annotated it, we've already analysed it. It's all about how do we actually put our ideas together into a really great essay to help us maximise our marks for the IB. So last lesson we really focused on criterion A and criterion B, which is all about understanding and analysis. But this video lesson is focusing on criterion C and criterion D, which is how well do we focus on our guiding question? How well do we organise our ideas into an effective essay? How can we write in a really formal and effective style with accurate spelling, punctuation and grammar and a lovely formal and academic register? So this is really all about C and D, and A and B were covered in the last lesson. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you a method for getting a high mark on your IB English, both paper 1 and paper 2 actually. And we're going to do that by having a look at horizontal planning and writing some beautiful petal analysis paragraphs. So please do stick it out all the way to the end. This will help to improve your grade. On to the horizontal planning then. So reminder, our guiding question is this: the interplay between image, layout and language to achieve its purpose. Now, if you joined us for our last lesson, we know it's a print advert, so its purpose is to persuade and to sell, right? So everything that we're analysing is linking back to how is it persuading the reader to purchase the toys. Now, horizontal planning looks like this. So firstly, you will have your introduction, in which you'll need to outline Teep Kalim and your thesis and give a roadmap. From there, based on your roadmap, you will have 3 main body big paragraphs, 3 analysis paragraphs, which are focused by big ideas. So rather than having a paragraph about similes, a paragraph about emotive language and a paragraph about images, we're going to group our analysis by arguments. This will help you to get a better mark for criterion C, focus and organisation. A really common mistake with a guiding question like this, the interplay between image, layout and language, is that students will just have a paragraph about image, then a paragraph about layout and then a paragraph about language. But the question is asking about interplay. How do they interact with each other? So by analysing these elements so separately, you can't possibly answer your guiding question. You can't possibly talk about interplay. So horizontal planning will help you to do this a lot more. Now, after you've decided on your big ideas, your big arguments, you are going to analyse them in a petal paragraph, which we'll come on to later. And then finally, you will conclude, in which you will restate your argument and say what lessons can be learned from the text. That is a brief whistle-stop tour of horizontal planning. Let's begin at the top with introductions. Beginning with introductions, how do you write a really good introduction for the IB English A? What do they expect? So firstly, have a think to yourself. What do you think the purpose of an introduction is? Why write one? The purpose of an introduction. Firstly, you want to provide some context, some background information or context about the subject or topic. So whatever your chosen text is about, if you know anything about the context, for example, Supercat, we know it was published in 1950s America, where it was slightly more patriarchal and slightly more traditional gender roles than in the modern day. That would be relevant background context that your reader might need to understand. You also should present your thesis. Now, thesis means your argument, your perspective. What are you trying to say about the text that the IB have given you? So you are introducing your main argument, your thesis statement of your essay. This really is to outline what your essay will aim to prove or discuss. And you should finally outline your structure. So you're aiming to give your readers a roadmap. You're letting them preview and know what this essay will discuss so that the reader clearly knows your organisational structure. So by a roadmap, and we'll get into this more, but I basically mean in your introduction, this is a terrible road, but your reader should know, okay, we're going to discuss, here's the thesis, here's the first argument, here is the second argument, here's the third argument. They can read your introduction, they can say, this is what this person believes, and 1, 2, 3, this is how they're going to prove it. As we've said then, in your introduction, you need to outline Teep Kalim. Now, maybe the L and the I, the language and the image, are going to be less relevant here because that's going to be really your analysis. But certainly by the end of your introduction, I should be able to tell that you know what is the text type, what are the elements of the text type, who is the author, what is the purpose, what is some context, who is the audience, and what is the overall meaning of the text. That is what you're aiming to outline in that introduction. You need to state what you believe that the text's main message is, and that will be your thesis statement, your argument. After that, you will give a roadmap where you will outline the most important aspects of the text that your essay will focus on, and those should be big arguments, right? So it shouldn't be that you're like, this text achieves this through emotive language, because we need to go a little bit deeper. And do make sure that you are focusing on your guiding question the whole way through. You will not get a high mark if you are not focused on your guiding question. Okay, so we've discussed what should go into the introduction, but what does that actually look like? Let's have a look at an exemplar. This print advertisement was published in the pages of Supercat, a children's comic book, and aimed to achieve two primary purposes: to persuade its target audience of children and parents to purchase children's toys, while reflecting and reinforcing the prevailing gender stereotypes of the era. Although a modern audience might find aspects of this advert to be sexist, it reflects the contrasting expectations of boys and girls, offering distinct visions of play, identity, and aspiration for Americans in the 1950s. This essay will analyse the contrasting expectations of boys and girls, how the text uses gendered stereotypes to appeal to children, and how appeals to logos are utilised to convince parents, as the end purchaser, to buy the toys. So what makes this such a good introduction? Well, firstly, we are outlining Teep Kalim. So we have identified the text type as a print advertisement, the author as the comic book Supercat. Remember, it's fine if the author isn't a person's name, it might be a company. We have identified the purpose, which is incredibly important because the guiding question asks to achieve its purpose. But we've also identified two purposes, which is a higher level thing to do, to recognise that a text can be simultaneously doing two things at once. So on the one hand, the text has a purpose of trying to persuade parents to purchase the toys, but a secondary purpose, and one that perhaps the text doesn't intend to do and yet still does, is that it reinforces gender stereotypes. So here we've picked out actually two purposes. And this really is the overall message, right? This is the message that the text is trying to send out. Buy my toys, but buy the toy that best conforms to your gender. And then finally, it has also identified context, where it has said that it is aimed at Americans in the 1950s. Now, what is the thesis? So we have got a thesis statement here in bold. This is when you say what you believe that the text's main message is. It is your argument or your perspective about the text. Now, this is obviously a personal opinion. Like I said in the last video, plenty of people might look at this advert and say, Mr. O'Rourke, you're reading into this too deeply. That's not what it means at all. This is my personal interpretation of the text. That yes, of course, it's trying to persuade parents to buy the toy. Of course, that's a purpose. But I do think that there is a secondary element of gender stereotypes that's very, very prevalent in this text. So this is really the point that is going to guide the whole of my essay. It's going to be the main argument that I make throughout. Finally, then we have got the roadmap. Now, this is when you will say, essentially, this essay will focus on 1, 2, 3. And the 1, 2, 3 will be your three main body paragraphs. So whatever you say in this roadmap should then be what the topic of your following paragraphs are. This will help the examiner to see, okay, the student has planned ahead, they know where they're going with this, they really thought about their structure, but it would be bad if you had a roadmap and then your then your paragraphs didn't follow that roadmap. That would leave the examiner and any reader quite confused, so do be careful of that. A reminder that the roadmap should be big ideas and not techniques. We will get more into that in a second. It helps your reader because it lets them know what to expect, what they will read in your essay. It will help you to structure your response because it forces you to think about what structure you're going to do. And therefore, all over, you will get a higher mark for criterion C, focus and organisation. So the roadmap here says that this essay will analyse the contrasting expectations of boys and girls, how the text uses gendered stereotypes to appeal to children, and how appeals to logos are utilised to convince parents, the end purchaser, to buy the toys. So see here, we've got 1, 2, 3 big ideas, and these are going to be the topics of my following main body paragraphs. Also notice that the whole way through I am not using first person. I'm not saying I will analyse, I'm saying this essay will analyse. So do avoid using first person in academic essays. Now, something that I mentioned a lot there was big ideas. So you're probably wondering, how do I figure out what the big ideas are? What do you mean by that? Let's delve a little bit deeper into that now. So the big ideas are really crucial with horizontal planning because these will help to guide your essay. They will form your roadmap, they will form the topic sentences of each of your analysis paragraphs. So super, super important. But how do you figure out what the big ideas are? A common mistake that I see my students doing when they're writing their essays is that they will group their essay by technique. So instead of having a big idea, they will say, this text uses diction, which, by the way, please don't say that. This text uses diction just means this text uses words, like, of course it does. Or even just, this text uses similes. Right, so now I'm going to read a whole paragraph about similes. How much is there to say? Possibly, right? So you shouldn't say this text uses emotive language. It's too narrow. You're not going to have a lot to argue. You're not going to be able to get particularly deep. Or by using a feature. This text uses images to sell to children. Again, that's too narrow. This text uses layout. This text uses text, right? So avoid technique, avoid feature. You're going to do it by big ideas instead. When you organise your essay by big ideas, by arguments, it allows you to discuss language, form and structure simultaneously, which with an interplay question is really crucial. It shows the examiner that you can draw connections, you can see how multiple features come together to create the same effect, or in other words, how you are evaluating the text. So it will also get you a higher mark, therefore for criterion B too. I have now got 3 slides of some common big ideas. Now you could apply these to any text. Obviously, the beauty and the curse of paper 1 is you could get any text. So I can't tell you, okay, you always need to have a paragraph about emotions and then you always need to have a paragraph about secondary purpose because the text might not actually fit that. So I'm going to give you some ideas of common big ideas that often come up that you might want to make the topic of your paragraph. So you could have a paragraph all about the appeal to ethos. How does the text appeal to credibility? How do they build trust? About an appeal to pathos, which is appealing to emotion, or to logos, which is appealing to logic, facts, statistics. If you are someone that really struggles with paper 1, maybe you're often getting 4s or lower, I would recommend that you could just structure your essay, introduction, paragraph about ethos, paragraph about pathos, paragraph about logos. That would be fine. It wouldn't get you a 7, but it would definitely help you to move from 4 to 5 or maybe just about 5 to 6. You could also have a paragraph about oppositional readings. I discussed that in my last video lesson. So was there an unintended message that the text might have? Something that the text suggests, but that you don't think that the author intended to suggest. For example, in this advert, I don't think that the author intended to be sexist, but like they were. So that is an oppositional reading, and you could have a whole paragraph about that. You could also have a paragraph analysing primary and secondary audience. Perhaps how does the text appeal to 2 different audiences? For example, in this past paper, we've got an appeal to parents and children at the same time. So that could be a really good big idea that you could have a paragraph about in an essay. Similarly, you could also have a paragraph analysing the use of primary and secondary purposes. How does the text identify and tackle 2 different purposes at the same time? Some more big ideas, you could have a paragraph about context of production versus reception. So for example, this text was produced in 1957. Would an audience in 1957 read this text differently to a modern audience today? So it's basically How would people have responded to it at the time and place it was produced versus you today, right? So that could be an interesting topic for a paragraph. You could also have a paragraph all about tone shift. If there is a shift in tone, obviously. So if you notice that, for example, a text begins quite wistful and happy and then gradually becomes more depressing and angry throughout, then you could have a paragraph analysing that tone shift. Where does it change? How and why? What's the reason? Very often for paper one, you will have both visual and textual elements in your text. So you might have a blog that also has a photograph, for example. So you could have a paragraph thinking about the interplay between the visual and textual elements in your text. Thinking about how do those features come together and harmonise to create the same effect or even contrasting effects. Up next, you could also have a paragraph about contrast more generally. So are there any contrasting ideas, languages or tone in the text? For example, this past paper that we're looking at right now has got very contrasting expectations for girls versus boys. So that will be a good focus for one paragraph in our essay. Another thing that you could write a paragraph about is how the text builds rapport. So rapport means a sense of personal friendliness. How does the text create that sense of closeness with the reader and why? You could also have a paragraph about symbolism or imagery. Does the text use any symbolism, create any imagery? Why? The final slide, the third slide, you might often find, especially in more text-heavy past papers, that they will have narrative elements. So you might want to analyse how the text has features of plot structure. How does it have an introduction, an inciting incident, rising tension, climax and resolution? So where is that climax? Does it have elements of dialogue or characterizations such as you might expect to find more so in a piece of fiction? And again, why is it using these narrative elements? How is it effective at achieving the text's purpose? You could also have a paragraph about intertextuality. So does the text allude to other texts? Does it reference other texts like movies or films or pop culture references? For example, there was one past paper that I did with my year 13s last year, and that was all about a dog that becomes a plastic bag. But it was referencing Kafka's The Metamorphosis, right? Where one day a man wakes up and he finds that he's become an insect, so that you could analyse that element of intertextuality there. That was a little bit hard. I don't think that the IB would actually expect most people to guess that, but if you could notice those allusions, that would be really good. Next, you could also talk about how the text calls the reader to action, especially if it is an advert that is going to be a primary purpose. Read this, do this, buy this. So what action does the text want the reader to take next, and how effective is it at this call to action? How does it achieve this? You could also analyse how the text challenges the reader's beliefs. Perhaps it is an infographic all about food waste, right? And it aims to make the reader think about how much food they waste in their everyday lives, lets them see how they're contributing to a massive problem that perhaps they didn't even realise existed. So does the text attempt to challenge the reader's beliefs? How, why, and how effective is it? You could also analyse any contradictions. Does the text contradict itself? Is it consistent throughout in terms of its messaging? And finally, we have got bias. Does the text hold any bias or assumptions? In this past paper, for example, there's lots of bias about what boys should do versus what girls should do, right? So going back to our horizontal planning then, we have written an introduction which outlined Teepkalim, and we had our thesis statement, which was, this advert persuades children and parents to purchase children's toys while reflecting and reinforcing gender stereotypes. Then I needed to give my roadmap, which is going to be my big ideas. So the big ideas that I selected are these three here. So big idea one, the contrasting expectations of boys and girls. Big idea two, appealing to two genders. And big idea three, how it appeals to parents by using logos, appeals to logic. So now we have got almost halfway through in our horizontal plan. Now, if those are my big ideas, the next question is, okay, you've got your big ideas. What elements of the text are you going to use to prove that your big ideas are correct? So in the last lesson, we analysed these three areas. We analysed elements of ads, such as use of visual elements, white space, concise copy, headlines, benefit-orientated language, call to action, contact information, and fine print. We also analysed the images in depth, for example, thinking about the active boy in the photograph whilst the girl isn't even featured in her image. And we also analysed language, so we spoke about semantic fields of military and violence, the factual tone and listing, especially in the boys advert. We also thought about the use of exclamation marks and onomatopoeia. So now I need to decide which of these bits of analysis are all going to come together to prove that my big idea is correct. So this is what I did. So, for my paragraph that analyses the contrasting expectations of boys versus girls, I am going to discuss the use of images and how we have got active versus passive children. So, the boy that's in his advert actively playing with his toys, whilst the girl's toys are still in the box and she's not even featured anywhere in the advert. We're also going to analyse an element of print ads, which is call to action. The call to action in the boys advert is aimed directly at the boy. Remember, it says, rush the toy to me. Whereas the advert for the girl's toy is aimed at her parent. There's nothing directed at the girl herself. And also in terms of tone, there are different tones in terms of the language choices for boys versus girls. The boys is a lot more factual and unemotional, whereas the girls is like, oh, make your little princess happy. A lot more whimsical and magical, I suppose. Then for my second paragraph, I'm going to think about how it appeals to the two different genders. So how is it appealing to boys versus how is it appealing to girls? So once again, I'm going to think about the use of images, but I'm going to make sure not to repeat myself to say something completely different. So now I'm going to talk about how the images mimic gender roles. For example, we see that the girls' dolls are all dressed in dresses. Not a single one of them is wearing pants or even a skirt. And obviously, because they're buying toys, the boy has got military dress. In terms of copy, which means the text, so the boy's copy is far more concise, it uses listing, whereas the girl's is one romanticized paragraph. And for language, I'm going to think about the use of pronouns. Finally, in my third paragraph, when I'm going to think about, okay, how is this text really appealing to parents through Logos, these are going to be my bits of evidence. So I'm going to think about the use of benefits-oriented language as a sales tactic, the fun to buy, trade, sell. I'm also going to think about the use of imagery as the toys as proof of quality, and to back that up, also the use of numerical figures, the heights of the dolls, the heights of the soldiers are very much included, especially for the boys' toy. So you can see that because I have horizontally planned and because I have grouped by big idea, now all of my paragraphs are going to include multiple aspects of the text. I'm not just going to have one paragraph about language, one paragraph about images. I'm really thinking about interplay, and it shows the examiner how well I have organised and grouped my ideas. Now we need to actually write up our analysis paragraph, and the acronym I'm going to teach you for that is PETAL. So what does PETAL stand for? PETAL stands for, firstly, point. So point is your topic sentence. Now this should be your argument, it should be your big idea. So whatever you've put in your roadmap and your horizontal plan, that should be the first sentence of your paragraph so that your reader knows, this paragraph is all about this. And indeed, after I finish reading your paragraph, I should be able to go back up to your topic sentence, back up to your point and be like, did everything that I read match that first sentence? And if it doesn't, then you've got an issue with focus and organisation. Up next, you're going to give some evidence. So you should have some embedded quotations. Remember, keep those quotations short, between 1 to 6 words, I think is the best. And textual references. So evidence also does count as referring to anything that you can see, right? Also. So visuals like the photographs, that would also count as evidence. After that, you are going to talk about a technique. So that could be literary terminology, for example, simile, metaphor, etc. It could be advert terminology like call to action, or image terminology like rule of thirds, or colour palette, or so on. Now, anytime you ever tell me a technique, you always have to tell me the effect, and the effect is your analysis. So what is the effect of the technique? Why is it being used? And what is its deeper meaning? And then finally, you are going to link. So you should always, always, always link back to your guiding question, your message, the audience, or purpose. Now, in terms of the petal paragraph, the analysis should be the biggest, juiciest bit. That's where you're going to gain the most marks. So do make sure that you develop that part nicely. And like I say down here, actually the best paragraphs will PETAL right? So I would say you should have one ETA, one evidence technique and analysis for image, and one ETA for language. And you can link multiple times throughout. Like, actually, what's really important is that you always begin with a point, you always end with a link, and that you've got lots of ETAs in the middle. If you mix them up, right? If you have got lots and lots of evidence the whole way through, maybe we've got an extra little E here, an extra little E here, not a big deal. But you do need to make sure that you've got lots of analysis, techniques, and evidence, and that you do begin with your point and that you do end with your L, your link. Just to break this down a little bit more, so our big ideas are our point, right? This is our topic sentence, our point. Then over here, this is our ETA, right? We have got our evidence, the image, the call to action, the differing tones, and the analysis, what is the effect, right? So we always need to say what is the effect, that is our analysis. And then finally, at the end of the paragraph, we need to link. So we need to link back to the guiding question. How is that helping this advert to achieve its purpose? How is all of that coming together to help this advert to either sell toys or to indirectly suggest something about gender roles? Next, we are going to have a look at a petal paragraph, so a really good paragraph. So when we look at it, think to yourself, where can you see the PETA structure? What do you notice about the use of quotations and textual references? Why is this a good response, and how could this paragraph be improved? Because nothing is ever perfect and everything can always be improved. Since this advert was published in the 1950s, contrasting expectations of boys and girls are prevalent throughout the text. The use of images is particularly telling. Whilst the boy's toy shows a photograph of a male child engaged and playing with his toy, no female child is present for the girl's toy. This perpetuates gender stereotypes of men as active leaders and women as passive caretakers. Indeed, the girl is so passive in this advert as to not be seen at all, and her toys remain in the box, whilst the boy's toys are seen in action. The use of language accentuates this effect, with the boy's toy text being more directed at the male child and the girl's toy being directed at her parent. For example, the boy's coupon reads, "Rush the toy army to me," using first-person pronouns to insinuate it is the male child ordering, whereas the girl's toy reads, "Make your little girl feel like a real princess." Part 2, this is all one paragraph, but I just couldn't fit it all on one slide. So part 2. Here, the text is directed to the parent rather than the child, which is ironic since in both cases it is far more likely to be the parent who completes the purchase. Attitudes towards the two genders can also be seen in these quotations, with the verb rush having connotations of urgency and force, again suggesting that the boy is an active participant in this purchase. By contrast, the girl is called a princess, which a modern audience may view as patronising and sexist, as it conjures an image of a girl in a castle with little power of her own. Nonetheless, this advert may have appealed to its original audience of younger children in the 50s, for whom these gender stereotypes were the norm to aspire to. Now here is your worksheet, and if you just scroll down you can see that you've got a copy of your petal paragraph right here. So what I want you to do is to have a go at unpicking the paragraph, and we're going to focus on all of the aspects of the mark scheme right now. And it's perfectly okay if you just want to stay focused on criterion C and D as our main focus for this lesson, but if you do want to have a think also about criterion A and B, of course you can. So here is the mark scheme broken down. Do pause this video now, have this mark scheme in front of you, and go back over that petal paragraph. Where is it organising its paragraph effectively? Where is it staying focused on the guiding question? Where is it writing with accurate spelling, punctuation and grammar, with precise vocabulary and an academic and formal tone? And if you do want to think about understanding, where is it having a persuasive interpretation of the text? Where is it using textual references? Criterion B, how is it insightfully analysing the writer's use of authorial choices, and how is it evaluating how all of these features come together to shape the text's overall meaning? Pause the video now and unpick the petal paragraph. So we can see then that it does begin with a topic sentence over here, which is our point, right? It's also a big idea. So it's talking about contrasting expectations of boys and girls. Now we're going to have two different loads of ETA, right? So firstly, we're focusing on the use of images, and the evidence is talking about the photograph. So the male child is playing with the toy, whereas in the second text there is no female child present at all. So this is all our evidence. Then we're analysing it and we're talking about how it's perpetuating stereotypes of men as active leaders and women as passive caretakers. That is quite an insightful point here. Then we're thinking about interplay, right? So how does the text used come together to create that same meaning between the images and the text? Remember, that is our guiding question. So it's talking about the use of language accentuates. This word here shows that we're building on the point that we made before. We're thinking about interplay. Not only do the images demonstrate that the boy is active whilst the girl is passive, so too does the text. And we're using some terminology for adverts here. We've got coupon and we've got a quotation, our evidence, rush the toy to me. Here we've got a technique, the first person pronouns, and the analysis, which that it makes it feel like it's the girl that's ordering, which is ironic because actually it's not going to be the girl or the boy ordering, it's the parent. And notice here again, I've got another quote. So remember I said earlier, it's okay if you have more than one ETA in the middle. It's okay if you have more evidence. This is an example of that. Then we're zooming into the use of words. The verb rush has connotations of urgency and force. So we've got some more techniques, some more terminology here, and the analysis too. And we're linking all of that back to this active participant. So we're showing how the text creates the same meaning as the images. And we're also thinking about context of reception versus context of production too. How a modern audience would see this text versus how an audience in the 1950s would see it. The use of imagery in terms of calling the little girl a princess, but then also, once again, really thinking about, but would it have appealed to the intended audience? And the answer is yes. In the 1950s, these gender stereotypes were normal and they were aspirational. So we're bringing all of this together back here, which shows, doesn't it, how the text achieves its purpose. It does achieve its purpose, which is to sell, right? So we are really focusing on the guiding question down here. I wonder if you guys have any advice for me on how I could further improve this paragraph. If you do suggest them in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. Now let's talk about conclusions. Have a think to yourself, what do you think that the purpose of a conclusion is? Why do we write conclusions? So the purpose of a conclusion is threefold. Firstly, you need to summarise your key points. You need to summarise the main arguments that you have made in the essay, providing a final answer to the guided question. I do recommend don't say anything new in the conclusion. Sometimes students are like, okay, here's my essay, bam, bam, bam. And in the conclusion, they're like, and by the way, and then they throw in a final bit of analysis that they have never mentioned before. And you're like, that's a great point. Why didn't you put it up there? It feels completely random if you say something totally new in your conclusion. You should also reiterate your thesis, so restate your argument. So what is the main argument of your essay? You're trying to remind your readers of your argument, of your central focus in the essay, and showing, look, this was my argument and I have proven it. And finally, a conclusion should offer some insight. So what are the broader implications of the text that you've read? What is the significance of the text that you've read in the wider world or in the modern day? You should give your reader a final thought or a takeaway message. Why is this text relevant or interesting or perhaps a bit confronting to a modern audience? And here is an exemplar. In conclusion, this 1957 print advertisement from Supercat effectively targets both children and parents, albeit through the lens of prevalent gender stereotypes of its era. It appeals to children by tailoring imagery and language to their respective gendered interests, promising excitement and emotional fulfillment. Simultaneously, it entices parents by emphasising the toy's value, cost-effectiveness, and promise to keep their children happily occupied. Whilst this advert reflects the gendered norms of 1950s America that a modern audience may find offensive, it serves as a historical artifact highlighting the evolving perceptions of gender roles in society and the changing landscape of advertising strategies. So here you can see that my conclusion does the following things. It restates its thesis, it summarises the main arguments made in the body of the text, and it provides some insight about why this text is still interesting and relevant today. Now we're going to put it all together and read the full exemplar. So this is a full Paper 1 Grade 7 response. There is a copy of this example on your worksheets in full. As we read it, just have these two basic questions in your head. What is good about this response and how could it be improved? Example Paper 1 response to toy adverts. Guiding question. In what ways does the interplay between image, layout and language help the advert to achieve its purpose? This print advertisement was published in the pages of Supercat, a children's comic book, and aimed to achieve two primary purposes. to persuade its target audience of children and parents to purchase the children's toys, while reflecting and reinforcing the prevailing gender stereotypes of the era. Although a modern audience might find aspects of this advert to be sexist, it reflects the contrasting expectations of boys and girls, offering distinct visions of play, identity, and aspiration for Americans in the 1950s. This essay will analyse the contrasting expectations of boys and girls, how the text uses gendered stereotypes to appeal to children, and how appeals to logos are utilised to convince parents as the end purchaser to buy the toys. And here's the paragraph that we've already read, but just so you can see what it feels like together, I'll read it again. Since this advert was published in the 1950s, contrasting expectations of boys and girls are prevalent throughout the text. The use of images is particularly telling. Whilst the boy's toy shows a photograph of a male child engaged and playing with his toy, no female child is present for the girl's toy. This perpetuates gender stereotypes of men as active leaders and women as passive caretakers. Indeed, the girl is so passive in this advert as to not be seen at all, and her toys remain in the box, whilst the boy's toys are seen in action. The use of language accentuates this effect, with the boy's toy's text being directed more at the male child and the girl's toy being directed at her parent. For example, the boy's coupon reads, "Rush the toy army to me," using first-person pronouns to insinuate it is the male child ordering, whereas the girl's toy reads, "Make your little girl feel like a real princess." Here the text is directed to the parent rather than the child, which is ironic since in both cases it is far more likely to be the parent who completes the purchase. Attitudes towards the two genders can also be seen in these quotations, with the verb rush having connotations of urgency and force, again suggesting that the boy is an active participant in this purchase. By contrast, the girl is called a princess, which a modern audience may view as patronising and sexist, as it conjures an image of a girl in a castle with little power of her own. Nonetheless, this advert may have appealed to its original audience of younger children in the 50s, for whom these gender stereotypes were the norm to aspire to. Next paragraph. Because of the binary way gender was viewed, the text must therefore attempt to appeal to two distinct target audiences, boys and girls. The secondary audience of this text is parents, but since this advert first appeared in the children's comic, Supercat, it is the children who first need to be inspired to badger their parents into purchasing the toy on their behalf. It is therefore more important to first consider how this text appeals to children. Once again, imagery appeals to boys and girls separately, with the cartoon of the military battle in action suggesting the excitement that can be had with plastic figurines. This would appeal to boys in the 1950s for whom World War II would still be culturally significant and whose fathers may have served in the military, making this toy aspirational for many boys. Similarly, the images of the girls' cartoon appeal to feminine ideals of the 1950s, depicting all the dolls in dresses, smiling and looking conventionally attractive. The use of copy similarly appeals to two distinct audiences. The girl's copy is a prose paragraph filled with romantic imagery of wonderful playthings and colourful costumes, whereas the boy's copy is extremely concise and contains lots of white space, simply utilising a list to demonstrate what precisely will be purchased. This suggests that the advertisers view boys as more pragmatic and numbers orientated, while the girls are more focused on emotions. However, it is not only the boys' advert that includes vital numerical information. The dolls' advert also states the size of the dolls, quantities and pricing. This is perhaps to appeal to parents rather than their children, or to establish precisely what will be bought, since the size of the adverts is limited by appearing in a print advert compared to online. Final main body paragraph. The final purchaser of the products is parents. Both adverts appeal to logos to secure sales. Benefits-oriented language is used to persuade the parents of the advantages of the toys, such as "watch your daughter's face light up when she opens the box." This language focuses on the positive outcomes of purchasing the dolls, thus appealing to logos as parents can directly see the positive outcomes of their purchase. Similarly, the cost of both toys is considered value for money at only $1 for the complete set, implying that no further purchase of dolls would be needed. Similarly, both titles are large, bold, and clearly state numerical figures of both quantity and the price of toys. This might be so that when the children encourage parents to look at the advert, they will quickly see the vast quantity of items they could purchase cheaply. Finally, both adverts appeal to logos, and to a certain extent pathos, by suggesting the happiness and engagement their children will get from the toys. For the Toy Soldiers advert, the text uses triples, fun to show, fun to trade, fun to collect, to suggest how the toy will engage and excite the child. The girl's toy states that the dolls will keep the child busy for hours on end. Likewise, the boy in the photograph is also playing alone and his toy is rigidly ordered, suggesting a sense of control and calm, which may appeal to busy parents who want to keep their child quiet and occupied. In conclusion, this 1957 print advertisement from Supercat effectively targets both children and parents, albeit through the lens of prevalent gender stereotypes of its era. It appeals to children by tailoring imagery and language to their respective gendered interests, promising excitement and emotional fulfillment. Simultaneously, it entices parents by emphasising the toy's value, cost effectiveness, and promise to keep their children happily occupied. Whilst this advertisement reflects the gender norms of 1950s America that a modern audience may find offensive, it serves as a historical artifact, highlighting the evolving perceptions of gender roles in society and the changing landscapes of advertising strategies. So once again, can you unpick this exemplar? Where is it meeting the mark scheme? Do have the worksheet open in front of you and pause the video for 5 minutes, go through and annotate why is this a very good response to paper 1. So if we go through and have a look then, we can see that the whole way through, every single main body paragraph is focusing on interplay. We haven't just got each paragraph analysing one aspect of the text in isolation, one paragraph just about images, one paragraph just about text. We are really thinking about interplay. So we've already analysed the introduction in the first main body paragraph, but do notice that I have got my roadmap right here. And then if we have a look, each of these main body paragraphs, their P, their point, their topic sentence is relating back to the roadmap. So here I literally say we're going to talk about contrasting expectations of boys and girls, and down here contrasting expectations of boys and girls. Next I say that we're going to talk about how they're using gender stereotypes to appeal to children, and in my second paragraph you can see, yes, we've got 2 distinct audiences, boys and girls, so we're going to analyse that next. And thirdly, we're going to analyse use of logos to convince parents. So here it's like contrast, here it's appealing to children, here it's appealing to parents. And yes, my third paragraph is focused very much so on parents. And then my conclusion brings it all together. So I restate my thesis, I summarise my arguments, and I think about the broader implications of the text. Now, in terms of improvements, one thing that I did notice that I said quite a lot, I kept saying similarly, and I thought some of that vocabulary was a little bit repetitive, so that would be something that I personally would improve if I was going to rewrite this. But I wonder if you guys saw anything else. Is there anything else that you think that I could improve? I'm sure that there was something. Please do comment and let me know. Then if we also think about techniques, so I've got pathos and logos, I've got use of triples right here, I do connotations further up, also the use of titles and bold and numerical figures. These are also techniques that I'm analysing. Here I've got very specific vocabulary related to adverts because I am analysing the print advert, so I talk about benefits oriented language. And over here some more terminology related with adverts. We've got white space, and we've also got the copy as well, numbers orientated. Where's copy? I can't find it right now, but I do mention copy. So I'm here, found it. So I'm not just analysing language features, I'm not just analysing text, I'm also thinking about, okay, but this is a print advert, so how is this text using elements of print adverts in order to achieve its purpose? So I've got all 3 of those things coming together. If you think back to this slide here, you can see that these were the 3 things I was focusing on. So elements of adverts, images, and language techniques. And I really tried my essay to make it so that these 3 things were balanced in terms of my analysis. Finally, let me just give you some general advice for paper 1 essay writing. So always make sure that you read your guiding question carefully and stay focused on it the whole way through. That is the purpose really of your P and your L in your petal paragraph, right? To make sure that you keep coming back to that guiding question. Always, always, always plan. So when you get into your exam, you are going to analyse your text, you're going to annotate it for Teep Kalim, and then you're going to quickly do the horizontal plan, right? So you're going to go, this is my thesis, this is my 3 big ideas, so idea 1, idea 2, idea 3, this is what I'm going to use to prove it, maybe pick 2 things for each one, and then what will your conclusion be? You're going to quickly jot all of that down to help with your planning. So when you actually get into the exam hall, for IB, you always have 5 minutes reading time where you're not allowed to write anything down, you can just read. So during that 5 minutes reading time, if you're doing SL, you'll have a choice between two texts. If you're doing HL, you'll have to do both. But if you're doing SL, then you should use that time to choose your text. If you're doing HL, you should use that time to start reading the texts. Then you'll have 1 hour and 15 minutes. So I recommend that you spend between 10 to 15 minutes annotating and planning. So that's when you annotate for your teep kalim and you could do a quick horizontal plan. Then you should spend around 50 to 55 minutes actually writing, and I do recommend that you do a 5-paragraph essay. So 1 paragraph is your intro, then you're going to have 3 main body paragraphs, and then you're going to have your conclusion. If you write really fast and you want to do 4 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs, fine, but only do that if you know that you can maintain the structure. Finally, do spend 5 to 10 minutes at the end proofreading. Remember that you get a quarter of your marks for your language and accuracy. So if you're making silly mistakes, if you're repeating vocabulary the whole way through and you haven't saved time for proofreading, you could be dropping some quick and easy marks that if you just gave yourself 5 minutes to go back over and check your punctuation, check your capital letters, check your spelling, that could change you from a 3 out of 5 to a 4 out of 5 for that criterion D. Why wouldn't you do that? Now I'm going to give you some advice for each of the different criterion. So beginning with criterion A, understanding. So the examiner wants to know 2 things. They want to know if you understand the text's literal meaning, like have you read it and do you understand it on a very basic surface level? And do you understand the deeper meaning of the text, what the text implies, what it suggests? Teep Kalim will help you with your understanding because it will make you focus on lots of different aspects of the text. But a higher level response will have an argument or a perspective about the text. So, for example, in mine, my perspective is actually this is showing 1950s attitudes towards gender, which a modern audience might find quite sexist. That was my perspective about the text. You can also show that you understand the text by selecting the best quotations. So not just by quoting, right, because anyone can quote anything, but by picking the best quote to prove the point that you are making. And remember, it doesn't just have to be a quote, it can also be a textual reference. So citing a feature of a photograph or the use of headlines or the use of columns, those things also count as evidence. It doesn't just have to be a quote. For analysis and evaluation. So if your guiding question doesn't mention language, you still need to analyse language. I remember my year 13s on that mock paper that I told you about, the cartoon about the dog who becomes a plastic bag. Now the guiding question didn't mention language, and so students wrote whole essays just analysing the use of colour and cartoon features, but they ignored all of the text, and it had loads of text. So even if it doesn't mention language, you still need to analyse language. This is an English exam. Why would you ignore words on the page in an English exam? It's really good to think about how textual features and visual features come together to create the same effect. In other words, interplay. Even if your question doesn't ask you about interplay, once again, still think about how things come together because that is evaluation, right? Thinking about how lots of different techniques come together and merge and converge to create the same effect, that is you evaluating. Every time you identify a technique, you must tell me the effect. Otherwise, you're just feature spotting. Otherwise, you're just like, here is a simile, and here is an oxymoron, and here is use of ethos. Cool, but why has it been used? What is the effect? How does that persuade the audience to do whatever the purpose is, right? And you must link all of your analysis back to what you believe the text's main message, purpose, and/or audience are. For criterion C, focus and organisation, you will only score highly for criterion C if you do actually plan. I know lots of students think, I don't need to plan, like I can write an essay just fine. I can tell when you haven't planned and you won't get 5 out of 5. So do make sure that you are doing my horizontal plan with your thesis and your big ideas and then quickly noting down what each of your supporting evidence will be for those big ideas. Stay laser focused on your guiding question. If you get off topic from your guiding question, then you're going to lose marks for focus. Do make sure that you are structuring your essay by big ideas rather than techniques. This will get you a higher mark. And do make sure that your topic sentence, your points, matches the analysis in the rest of the paragraph, right? Oh no, what am I doing? If your topic sentence talks about use of ethos and then you're just analysing numerical figures, well, you haven't actually stayed focused. Do try not to repeat ideas or quotations because then it kind of feels like, oh, and also, by the way, this point could also mean you're like the next page over. So try not to repeat anything. And it is better to write a shorter and well-organized essay than to write a long, chaotic essay. I do try to emphasize quality over quantity. Better to write 3 pages well-structured than to write 6, and it's not well-structured, because you can get a grade 7 for a 3-page essay, right? You don't need to write lots and lots and lots necessarily. Advice for language. Do make sure that you stay formal and academic in your language choices. Avoid anything slangy, avoid anything too humorous. So, for example, don't say nowadays. Do try to use some sophisticated vocabulary precisely. Don't just sound like you swallowed a thesaurus, you need to actually use them correctly or it won't count. Criterion D language also includes your use of subject terminology. So if you're not using precisely the techniques that you need, like metaphor, connotation, target audience, white space, etc., then you'll lose marks actually for criterion D, not criterion B. Avoid any slang or chatty language like nowadays, lately, many people. And like I said earlier, do avoid first person I. Instead, you should write in passive voice and say, this essay will discuss, rather than my essay will discuss. Try to vary your sentence openings, lengths, and constructions so that your use of sentences aren't too repetitive. And if you can use colons and semicolons correctly, then use them. But if you can't use them, then it's better to not use them at all than to use them incorrectly. And don't forget that any analysis should be in present tense, like the text demonstrates a contrasting da. Here we are in present tense. So whenever you analyse a text in paper 1 or paper 2, always use present tense for that. Finally, on to proofreading. Do remember that this exam is equally rated, so there are 5 marks available for your spelling, punctuation, grammar, use of academic formal language, etc. So in theory, you could not understand the text at all, but write a very well-structured essay with great vocabulary, and that will protect some of your marks, right? Because you get 5 for understanding, 5 for analysis, 5 for organisation, and 5 for language. So you get half of your marks just for writing a nice essay that's correctly written. So therefore, any time spent proofreading is time well spent. So you should check that your tenses are consistent, that your full stops and commas are used correctly, check that you're not being repetitive in your word choices or phrases, check for any spelling mistakes or missing words or any phrases that you think are unclear. Do spend that 5 to 10 minutes at the end proofreading your work. It will pay off. Do take a screenshot of this or download the worksheet, but here is a reminder of the horizontal planning. This is your key takeaway for today's lesson. I do hope that this video lesson was useful to you. Head on over to my website now to take the review quiz and see how much you remember. Leave a comment if you like this, and do like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye.